The amount of money in the American political system has now reached unprecedented levels. Recent Supreme Court decisions like Citizens United have allowed for money to flow into elections largely without restraint, largely from wealthy white males, a startling contrast to an electorate that is increasingly comprised of people of color, women, and young voters. A Washington Post analysis found that 41% of money raised by super PACs originated from just 50 mega donors and their relatives. The need to raise a tremendous amount of funds makes it exceedingly difficult for qualified candidates who do not have access to large sums of money or big donors to run viable campaigns. Furthermore, research has suggested that in a political system dominated by the wealthy, the government's policy is actually biased toward the most affluent citizens' preferences. The most important current solution to address the influence of money in politics is small donor public financing. It can lower barriers to running for office, encourage candidates to focus on constituents, increase citizen engagement in elections, and enhance constituent representation. While public financing systems are not currently available to candidates running for most federal offices, such systems do exist in several states and localities. This video highlights the experience of 6 elected officials who used public financing and how it impacted their ability to run for office and shape their perspective upon being elected.
I believe that public financing of campaigns holds the key to restoring our democracy because it levels the playing field and it allows regular people, regular citizens to run for public office.
I was the candidate who wasn't supposed to win. I was the candidate who was the outsider, and yet I sit here today 4 years later as a person who's been effective in Connecticut politics.
I would not be in this position and I would not have served in the city council but for campaign financing in the city of New York. It created, without campaign financing, there's a number of hurdles that one has to overcome. And particularly when you run in a citywide, for a citywide office. I was running against someone whose family was well off and who had connections to individuals in Washington and people in high places. I did not have those connections. All I had was the support of working class people in the city of New York, again, who believed in my vision and who wanted a more diverse body politic in the city of New York.
I've used campaign finance since the beginning. I've actually ran for public office a couple of times, and each time I participated in the program. And when I won in 2009, it was the campaign finance program that helped propel me to victory, especially at a time when I didn't have any political support, from the traditional political organizations or like elected official. It was a grassroots movement, and campaign finance really helped quite a bit.
We had a lot more community candidates. It wasn't the whole slew of people playing musical chairs or folks who are very entrenched in the system, but it was actually average, regular citizens from the neighborhoods.
You may have some candidates who are independently wealthy and they're able to, or maybe tap a very large donor base. There are other candidates who represent areas where that's not as possible. And it gives us the opportunity through a matching funds program to be able to be viable candidates.
Currently, candidates must commit substantial amounts of time to fundraising with big donors, taking away from the time that could be spent engaging with a broader base of the electorate. Public financing systems, like those in New York City, Los Angeles, Maine, or Seattle, largely free candidates from dialing for dollars. It encourages them to spend more time knocking on doors, attending community events, and interacting with prospective voters.
Running a campaign is like starting a startup company. The first monies is always the hardest to get because you have to show people that you're viable.
It provides the type of funding that you do need, the proper amount of funding that you do need to run a campaign in this day and age, with postage and printing and mailing and consultants and printing and all the things that go along with that. But it also forces us, even though it shouldn't have to, but it does, it forces us to engage with our constituents or the people that we're hoping to represent in a very meaningful way.
Candidates tend to stand up and listen to, where their support is coming from. And it should be from the average person in our community, the person who really does care about affordable housing and education.
I think the campaign finance system is great because it allows us to really get community involved and also not to have to spend a lot of time on fundraising because of the generous, matching fund. In the beginning, when I first ran, back in 1991, it was only like 4-1. And in 2009, it was 6-1. So someone, giving you $10 equals $70.
Those people who disagree with having a system like this don't want to talk to their constituents. And I'll tell you this, it empowers constituents in a way that I don't know how else you do it, particularly because of the way we're set up. So in Connecticut, you have a system where you operate between $5 and $100. But I need all of those people because there's a number of people I have to have. So when I go to the little old lady who only has $5 to give, that $5 is worth as much as that $100. Where else do you have $5 equal to $100? I mean, you look at $5 and $100. They're not equal, except in this system they are. And so that older woman who doesn't have a lot to give, or young man who doesn't have a lot of money who can give $5 becomes important. And I spend a different type of time with that person than I otherwise would have spent.
By placing greater value on small contributions, small donor public financing encourages a larger and more diverse set of voters to engage in the electoral process.
I really do believe that it does create a significant amount of advantages for candidates, not only in allowing us to be competitive, but also allowing us to spend more time engaging with our constituents, as opposed to in a room somewhere calling and hoping to raise money, which I understand is a very necessary part of being a candidate. But imagine if you could spend a little less time doing that and a little more time in someone's living room listening to the concerns that they have, hearing the ideas that they may have. You can become a much more engaged and responsive candidate and hopefully elected official if you get elected.
And the reason why I believe that the vast majority of individuals who are eligible to vote do not vote is because they believe that their voice does not matter. And campaign finance allows their voices to matter. And that's why we really need to support and replicate campaign finance on a state level and on a federal level and in other jurisdictions.
A lot of people use polling and whatnot, and I had my own polling, because I was actually at the doors. I mean, I knocked on about 6,000 doors, and personally shook at their house about 3,000 hands, 3,000 plus. And this is not including all the community meetings and town halls and coffees. So I had my own polling where they actually told me about issues. And I knew about issues that were going to happen in various areas before anyone else found out about it, because it was something that was reoccurring. One big issue that kept on reoccurring was, and I told this, I went back and reported to my campaign team, and I said, coyotes is a huge issue. And they said, what? They said, we never heard it anywhere. I said, I'm getting it at the doors.
By, engaging in terms of community resident, people in the neighborhood to be able to get involved in the campaign, making a small contribution and getting their neighbors and friends involved, hosting small parties, small gathering, and then getting involved in helping to spread the word. And when people get involved, it's amazing.
The matching funds program and the public financing of campaigns has allowed for the voices of smaller donors and regular people to have a greater say in the outcome of elections, in who runs for public office, and what those candidates look like, and what they represent, because they have no choice but to engage them, but to listen to them, and but to accept smaller contributions from them, and include them in the campaign discussion.
Because small donor public financing lowers barriers to entry, incentivizes candidates to engage more with constituents, and encourages more everyday Americans to invest in the electoral process, candidates elected in such systems are more likely to represent the needs and priorities of their constituents.
When they saw that their vote actually made me win, they get super excited. Now it's my responsibility, now that I'm elected, if I come back and start addressing many of their issues, whether it's micro or macro, and they see the results happening, that's how we get them engaged. Re-engage, rebuild trust in government, rebuild trust in their elected officials. And I go around and tell folks, if I do my job right, at the end of my term, you won't call me a politician, but a public servant.
Unfortunately, nationwide, there's only a few individuals who really control the body politic, and most of those individuals happen to be millionaires or billionaires. And so we really need to have more diverse voices in city, state, and on the federal level. And more people need to be involved in politics. And the best way to be involved in politics is to show it by making small contributions and equalizing the playing field, so that so that millionaires and billionaires are not the only ones who have a seat at the table.
If you want it to remain the public's government, you might have to use the public's money. Otherwise, you're going to have government by the few who've paid for government. I'm beholden to the people who have been saying for a long period of time, we don't have a voice. And so my job becomes not to make sure that the party's happy and not to make sure that the lobbyists are happy, but to make sure that the very people who I'm supposed to represent are happy. That's a different type of politics.